Previously on Black Girl Absolute.
I thought it would be pretty interesting looking at art supplies coming from Target and seeing whether or not they're able to perform in their own right. The things that I'm going to be looking for with this canvas are to make sure that it is properly primed. It's this like nice satiny texture supposedly. It looks very promising, so I'm really excited about that. Because that is a very like audacious thing to call yourself, that you're America's favorite. We have to see in terms of quality what Target is providing us here today. Folks, ladies, and gentlemen, it is today is the moment of truth, everybody. I use those art supplies from Target. So today I'm just gonna review all of them. So yeah, let's jump right in. So this video is part 2 to my original video. I'm doing the Target shopping haul. If you haven't seen that video, I'm gonna put a link up above where you can go watch that video first. So just as a really quick recap, I went to my local Target and I picked up a bunch of acrylic art supplies just for the explicit purpose of seeing whether or not you could create, you know, beautiful, authentic art without spending a bunch of money like I would do if I were going to like Art Materials or Michael's, for example. What I did was, over the course of the last week and a half, I took these art supplies and I created a painting out of them based off of one that I had created over this past summer. So I no longer have the original for this painting, I just have the picture that's on this magazine cover. But I use this as an example so that I could recreate the image as best as I, was able. So the reason why I chose this picture in particular is that this was something that I created over the course of 2 weeks. So going with something simple just seemed really fair. So are you guys ready? I'm so excited for you all to see this. 3, 2, 1. But yeah, this was the final result. So obviously there are a couple of differences. I did some different stylistic choices, like making her afro just a little bit longer, and of course adding in these awesome glittery effects here at the bottom. So really quickly, I'll just go through all of the art supplies that it took to recreate this painting, and I'll go over whether or not I liked them, disliked them, what have you. So the first thing that I'm gonna start off with is about the canvas. Just like you can't build a house without a foundation, you can't make a painting without the canvas. So we should talk about that first. So this canvas, I think is, all right now. So this canvas is pretty comparable to any canvas that I would get from, any art supply store that's on the lower cost spectrum. This canvas, as you can see, is back stapled. There's usually 2 different kinds of canvases that you're gonna get. The 2 processes that you will see are gonna be back stapling and splining. Most cheap canvases are gonna have like this back stapling process where you kind of just pull the canvas around this wooden frame. So this isn't like an actual issue. Some people will point to being a sign of better quality. I haven't necessarily seen there being that much of a difference. I can't lie though, it does feel fancy to have like a splined canvas, but I'm also bougie, so. This canvas did a wonderful job, and I'm not even gonna say because of like it being cheap. Like, this actually was a pretty well-made canvas. I didn't have any issues with, putting the paint on the surface. It received everything really well, and it just, it was just a great end result. So the next thing I'm gonna talk about are the brushes. I was not a big fan of these brushes, and I'll tell you why. I didn't have as much control with these brushes as I thought I would have. And these also had the habit of shedding, like, a lot. I'm not saying that's not something that happens with expensive brushes, because it absolutely does. But that's usually something that's occasional. Like, that doesn't happen at the rate that it was happening with these brushes. It was kind of like every, 5 to 10 minutes, I was having to either pull hairs out of the brush or hairs off of the canvas. And overall, I just don't think it was the most pleasant experience. What I will say is really cool about these brushes is that it does include some arts education, which I think is like benefit that I don't think more professional brands will really consider, because they assume that by the time you reach them that you already know what you're doing, which isn't always the case. But these brushes, they'll tell you the name of the brush, which is pretty typical, but it'll also tell you what that brush is used for in a painting. So we have for here, the medium round is used for details and line work, versus the filbert, which is used for blending and coverage. So while I think like the educational side would be awesome for a new painter, I would kind of worry that they were also being held back by the fact that these brushes aren't that great whenever you actually attempt to use them. Next, we're gonna get into to the most important part of this review, the paints. You know, as an acrylic painter, the paints are the most exciting part of the process for me. And you know, that's not gonna surprise anyone, you know? Like, sure, all of these other components are fun to look at, but like, the paints are what bring me here, you know? And like, I was not going into this trying to hold anything against these paints for not being like golden or Utrecht or Blick, because that's not fair. The main goal was just to see if I could create something with these items and to have an experience that's, you know, somewhat similar to my experience overall with acrylic paint. What I will say, first and foremost, is an apology to Delta Creative for that joke I made in the first video. So I joked that it was very audacious for them to call themselves America's favorite. The experience with painting with this paint was actually pretty enjoyable. It had like a really decent texture, which I guess is that whole serum coat thing. I had, you know, the most familiar acrylic experience with these paints. I don't have equally pleasant feelings about this paint. I don't know what this paint is. And what I mean by that is that I have never I have never experienced an acrylic paint that behaves like this acrylic paint does. And again, this isn't about the price, because again, this, you know, Delta Creative Serum Coat acts exactly like how I would, you know, expect an acrylic paint to behave. It has like a similar thickness, a similar drying time. None of my experience with Delta Creative was anything different than I was already expecting or was familiar with. These handmade modern paints, on the other hand, these were so weird. The first thing that I noticed that was off about these were that these are extremely liquidy. Every time I poured these, it poured more or less like house paint than it did like actual acrylic paint. There was like this sort of weird trailing off effect that also happened, where like it just kept dripping. This peacock, whoa. That's a lot of trailing. Handling this is not great. At first I was like, okay, so maybe with this particular paint there was just some sort of additive or something that they left out that kept it from being that thick texture that we're used to with acrylic paint. Then I noticed that the very next day, so with any sort of paint palette like this, if it doesn't come with a top, usually just like leave it out unless you really want to maintain those paints, then you can put them in like a Ziploc. But you know, worst comes to worst, you can leave it out, let it dry overnight, peel off the old paint, and then refill it, start again. The very next day, I think it was like at least between like 8 to 12 hours later, I was walking past it and I noticed that all of the paints in this handmade modern collection were still fully wet. So this is like the next day, the next morning. These paints are still wet. I touched it because it looked like it was still wet, and it's still wet. This is completely wet. I don't know what's going on. I'm very confused. I was bewildered. I did not expect for all of these to still be like completely usable after that period of time. So yeah, I have no idea why these didn't dry out. That being said, the vast majority of the paints on this canvas are from Handmade Modern. I guess this glitter was Delta Creative, which it's honestly my favorite part. Even with like the weird textural issues and its weird inability to dry like a normal acrylic paint, the results are pretty good. I will say the one sort of drawback that is still kind of unacceptable to me is that they didn't have a lot of skin shades. This dark chocolate was basically all that I was working with. Something in this paint, whenever you tried to mix it, it just turned it gray. And I'm not exactly sure why that was. I'm not sure if there's something in here that just doesn't make it great to mix. Yeah, that one for me is like a big no-no. But even, you know, the weird texture issues, the lack of skin shades, all of that aside, it did what it was supposed to do. I was able to create something. And so at the end of the day, I think that's what matters most. Also, I didn't get to talk about this like easel that this is sitting on. This is like a super cute like tabletop easel. Like it's adorable. I love it. I have like such a thing for like small easels. It's like not the best easel, but it's also like $5, so who cares? Actually, wait, do I have my other? This is honestly one of my favorite things in my studio. I'm not gonna lie. Like, just this little easel. I don't think I've ever painted anything on this, and I don't care. This is my favorite thing in here. No, it's not gonna. You know what? There we go. So thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you've ever used art supplies from any place that was not an art supply, so say like Target, Walmart, Dollar Store, Dollar Tree, any of those, let me know in the comments down below. As always, you are enough. I love you all, and I hope you take care.